Hi, this is Steve Holden. I'm running for the Democratic nomination in the 24th Congressional District in New York, and this is my domestic policy gauntlet. So yes, I support everyone having their own health care and having it as government provided. I served for over 20 years in the military. That level of health care is something that I treasured for me, my wife, and for my children. However, I know the difficulty of what private insurers can cause. For example, my father, who's recovering from double cancer surgery, was more concerned about his copay and his monthly premium from Blue Cross Blue Shield than he was for recovering from his surgery. That should be eliminated. What we should do, and we can do it by eliminating, again, certain parts and excess within the DoD budget to maintain and keep up a Medicare For All single-payer option plan. This also can go through with a proposed wealth tax. People often talk income tax. I'm talking here about a health tax, a wealth tax that has been proposed by Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, where we actually take a look at assets. We have that, we can surely provide it. Now, people talk about, it's going to cost you more. Well, it really doesn't. You take a look at what you pay every month in premiums, how much you pay in prescriptions, and how much you pay in copays, it's actually less. The average American will actually pay less per year in healthcare, and your choice isn't taken away. It's not. If you take a look at countries in Europe or in Canada, that really doesn't happen. You're still able to get the level of coverage you need when you need it. Furthermore, I support the idea of having the government negotiate for prescription drug prices. My brother-in-law has an immunodeficiency disorder. If he didn't have to volunteer for clinical research, basically turning himself into a human guinea pig, his medication would cost $28,000. For people, you can buy a nice new car for that, or you can put a down payment on a nice house for that. Instead, he is having to put in for human research in order just to fulfill his prescription. That should never happen. Not in this country. There's way too much wealth here. And when you talk to people about calling it socialized medicine, no, it's really taking care of the least of these. It'd be like any other public utility. You talk to people in other countries, even conservatives in other countries, and say, we just think of it like the trash service, or we think of it like paving the roads. It's just another thing. It's a public service that is provided. So yes, I do support single payer, and I do support the idea of having the government have the ability to negotiate for lower prescription drug prices. Having diabetic medication going through the roof exponentially, and my wife is diabetic, should be something that never happens. So therefore, I support the Medicare For All initiative, single payer, and having the government be able to negotiate for prescription drug prices. So if we're taking a look at this as overall environmental policy and strengthening the Clean Water Act, one of the things I would do is ban hydraulic fracking. Again, I wasn't born here in central New York, but I know the problems of hydraulic fracking. It causes subterranean instability that not just can contaminate the topsoil, but also contaminate groundwater, which has implications on the nation's food supply and needless to say, on the water that we drink. One of the things I have been blessed to be involved with is a plan that was as part of my Green New Deal for Central New York. It's the first plank of it, is the passage up here in the state of New York to have clean air and clean water as a human right. And I would work with the Green Amendment for the Generations, which is a national movement to go at the state level and then finally at the federal level to have enough states come in, and where we have that finally as a constitutional amendment where everybody has a right to clean air and clean water. And for those people who say that it's partisan, here in the state of New York, there were 5 progressive initiatives on the back of the ballot. And we had a decidedly more conservative voting base come out, and it was the only one that passed. So this is a bipartisan issue. Everybody wants to have clean air, clean water, and arable land to grow their crops. That is no different here. So I would In the meantime, look to strengthen the Clean Water Act by eliminating hydraulic fracking, but work to a more holistic plan where we ensure that all people have the right, a human right, to clean air and clean water by changing state constitutions and working with state legislators and leaders at the state and local level, and then finally championing it at the federal level. That's my idea on how to help not just improve clean water, but also clean air and arable land as well, because they all go hand in hand. As someone who grew up in a community with a lot of Latin American immigrants, I can tell you that the elimination of ICE is probably the only option that we have. If we see that administrations like the prior administration used ICE as a fear-mongering tool to go into larger cities and try to, quote unquote, round up, as they would say, round up illegals, that's an organization that should never exist. It smacks of a secret police. ICE should now be absorbed into other federal agencies that have far better oversight. We also need to create federal legislation that does not allow for organizations like this to ever again exist. You have organizations like Customs and Border Protection that are there to enforce that policy. But we do not need ICE, which I view as a rogue agency, to be able to do that. And I actually talk with people on that work in Homeland Security who even agree with this. The incumbent right here is the ranking member of the Homeland Security Committee, and he wants to keep ICE. I want to eliminate it. An organization like that should never exist. But what we need is comprehensive immigration reform. It is a misnomer and is an intentional red herring for people on the right to call people like myself as wanting open borders. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. But a border wall, as I've said on many media interviews, is a 4th century solution to a 21st century problem. We need common sense immigration reform, not closing ourselves off to the other world and having a quote unquote secret police roaming the streets looking to round our neighbors up and turn them in. That smacks of a time I don't think any of us want to go back to. So those are my ideas for the elimination of ICE and for immigration reform. All right, so I would be in support of Amnesty for undocumented workers. Many of them right now pay taxes. They live in horrible conditions, and they are horribly treated. A lot of these people are stalwarts of the community. They go to our schools. They pay into the public trust. Those are individuals who should be allowed amnesty to stay here in the United States and to get citizenship and a pathway to citizenship. As long as they do not commit a felony or conduct any acts of terrorism, they should be able to be fully integrated. So you have amnesty and then the pathway to citizenship beyond that would allow for immediate citizenship. The next thing I would do is I would look to create harbors for them and also look to create and improve their living conditions. I am working with a group here in Central New York to improve the living conditions and working conditions of undocumented immigrants here in Central New York who work the apple farms and out in the vineyards in the Finger Lakes region. That I'll talk to later when I talk economics with fair trade, but that is a part of my idea here for amnesty. I do support amnesty, and I support a pathway to citizenship that allows them immediate front of the line citizenship here in the United States. These people are already helping with our communities. Let's make it fully legal now. I support the right for a woman to be able to handle the issues with her own body. And whether that is those rights solidified in Roe v. Wade, guaranteeing choice, or that's right to have comprehensive birth control, as well as taking a look at maternity leave, paternity leave, and increasing opportunity there for women. The term pro-life can't just stop as a political dog whistle. It has to actually mean something. And we need to increase the access for women's health. And of course, I support codifying this at the federal level and eliminating the Hyde Amendment. Also, and this goes back to several other rights I've spoken about here, I would look at judicial reform and increasing the number of people on the Supreme Court. I've talked about this before, but this isn't even more important now, because at the time of the filming of this, we have the Mississippi State case that's going before the Supreme Court. If that is done, women's rights will be set back almost 50 years. It'll go back to individual states, and we'll truly have a red versus blue solution to things. We need to eliminate the filibuster. We need to pass federal codification of protecting women's rights to do what they would need to do with their own bodies. So yes, I do support the codification of Roe v. Wade. I'm taking a look at this part as a three-part issue. I, of course, support saving the United States Postal Service. During the run-up to the 2020 election, when the Postal Service took extreme hits in order to help the prior president secure an election victory, one of the concerns we had was critical medications coming through the mail, as they do with me, as that's how I get my mail, I get my prescriptions, I should say, from the VA. We need to protect that. We need to fully fund the USPS and not outsource it to private organizations such as FedEx, DHL, or UPS. It's critical that they are maintained by the post office. Our founding fathers even put that in the Constitution for that reason. In rural communities, it is often the case that the post office is one of the central areas to get business done. So the critical supplies, also prescriptions, have to come through the post office. Now saying that, I also believe that the United States Postal Service should be able to provide banking services in certain communities. Some places may not be as practical, but definitely in underserved communities, particularly in communities of color and in rural communities, sometimes these would be the only places they could go for financial services. And I'm not just talking here just about getting money orders. We're talking about doing deposits, and we're talking about banking procedures. What is little known is that within the United States military, they already have postal finance sections in their postal units. As someone who worked as a finance officer for over 20 years, I can attest to this. So there is the capacity to do that. And fully funding the benefits for 70 years, if the average person who begins in the post office, even at 75, and who worked 30 years, 70 years in the future, the longest living person ever on earth was 124. That's documented. The reason she would have to secure it for 70 years puts an undue financial burden on the post office. That has to change. We can put it actuarially at about 40 years, because if you see if the average person could retire, then maybe puts them into their 90s. But 70 years is beyond the pale. So yes, I support saving the post office, expanding its operations so you can get critical supplies and business needs out to communities that need it, such as rural and communities of color, providing said banking services, and eliminating the 70-year, potentially moving it down to 40 or 50, or whatever sort of actuarial study would best provide the most logical solution. That's my policy on the United States Postal Service.